Welcome. I'm so excited for today. Liz is here. She is with Fidelity. Apparently, she was the top escrow officer for how many years is that? I think you said it. For a while. For a while.
No, she's amazing, you guys. Yeah. She was our top escrow officer for many years. She earned the rights to now do all of our escrow training, not only for our escrow staff, but for all of you guys as well, which is amazing. So there's nothing that she really can't answer as far as escrow and the process, and anything you guys come into contact with that might be something interesting or something different. Liz definitely a go-to. So with that,
yeah, and I want to say from a real estate perspective, what does this have to do with you? What's in it for you? So I've been working with an escrow officer exclusively as much as I can for most of my career. And the reason that I work with her exclusively is because when you build a relationship with someone, they help you with your business. And when you need first, like you need to know something about a property, or you need to know something about another escrow that maybe you couldn't hold with them, they'll be there for you and they'll help you out because you do business. Your escrow officer is just another part of your team. Fidelity is an amazing team. They have a ton of great escrow officers, and if you need someone, you can reach out to Jen Goodmen directly.
yes,
And she will hook you up with someone that you can partner with and add to your team. So when you have a team, that's your lender, your escrow officer, your inspectors, all of that. The people that you work with are almost a direct extension of you. And so you want to partner with people that are going to have your back, have your clients back, do a really good job.
and be there for you.
And be there for you. Yeah. Also, I just want to say today's class, Liz is going to teach us all about escrow. What does it mean? That's why it says 101. Yes. It's a beginner's course today. These are all brand new agents.
Great.
In our Ignite program, which is like their first 3 months in the business. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much.
Okay, guys.
All right. Enjoy.
Well, I'm Liz Tholen. I'm project manager for Fidelity National Title. I was an escrow officer for a very long time. And so now I get the privilege of teaching you. Now I have a bunch of standard jokes that I still think they're funny, so I'm probably like a dad and dad jokes. But I've been married for over 26 years, and so I'm used to being interrupted. So if you have a question, seriously, interrupt me in the middle of my sentence or whatever. So we're going to talk about escrow, but we're also going to talk about, after we talk about escrow and the life of an escrow, we're going to talk about things that if you are aware of in your transaction, even if it's a new transaction, you are going to want to talk to your escrow officer about it. It could be a problem, it could not be a problem, but the sooner that you communicate about it, the easier it is. So, all right, so escrow 101. So escrow 101, hopefully not super boring. I'll do my best. I don't have any great imitations in this particular presentation. So sorry. All right, so what is escrow? So escrow, for your purposes, is the process where a buyer and a seller are exchanging a house, basically. So you have a contract. Once you're in contract, you can open an escrow. Escrow means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So escrow, you could have an escrow on a boat or an escrow on a piece of art. For us, escrow is only about real estate transactions. So it is about the land and the house and all of that. That's what we're talking about when we have an escrow.
So, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So escrow is like, it's a third party that's making sure that things happen before the deal
Records and closes. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So we, as Fidelity National Title, we're a title and escrow company. So as far as escrow goes, escrow takes instructions from all parties. So that contract that you write is a set of instructions for us, basically. So we take those instructions, we compile them with the other items that we have, and once have all the money, have everything signed, then we close. So that's kind of a ways from where we're going to be talking about. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we do. So we take money. Sounds silly. That's probably the biggest thing we do is we take money and we present it to the seller. So we're going to talk about good funds in a little bit because that's really important to an escrow transaction. But for our purposes, simply, we have a seller who has a grantee, basically, deed to their house. There's a buyer who wants to buy a piece of property. The seller's gonna give the deed to us, the buyer's gonna give the money to us. And once everything's good, we're gonna switch. So we're the third party, we take instructions from everyone. So if something is not in agreement, we don't close. So escrow is the purpose of taking money in exchange for written instrument. Simply put. Okay. There's more to it. So we are actually a common depository. So we take funds from all parties. Sometimes we take funds from a seller if they're short to close. We might take third party funds from someone who's giving funds to the buyer. So, but we take funds in our transaction when we are whole. So when we have all the funds that we need to close the transaction and pay off the seller side, then we close the transaction. So we're the common depository. So when I talk about instructions, we get instructions from a lot. So we're gonna get the contract, we're gonna get seller's instructions, buyer's instructions, we're gonna get the preliminary title report. When we talk about that, ask me questions if I say something that you are not recognizing the term. Okay. So we do all those things, and then once we have instructions, and mutual instructions mean that there's no one that's in disagreement. So if there's sellers divorcing, they're in agreement, buyer's ready to close the transaction. So closing a transaction in California means you have a some states closing is signing documents. So closing here is when we are on record.
So when a deed is recorded, then that's when it's put in the new buyer's name.
Exactly.
Yes, so a lot of times people get confused. They think once they sign the documents, that's it. So here, where we are, you sign the documents and then the escrow gets it down to the county, like Liz said, to record it. And that's, once we get confirmation that it's recorded, that's when the deed is, yes, it's all closed.
So after escrow is open, there's all kinds of things that are happening simultaneously. So escrow, we get the preliminary title report that shows anything recorded against the property. So it's going to show the seller's information, tax information, if it's mortgages, liens, judgments, homeowners associations. So we're going to get all those items. We're going to get loan information, prepare our estimate so the buyer can have their CD prepared. And once we have loan documents, we can get the buyer signed, prepare seller's documents. Everybody gets signed. We do all those things often simultaneously at the same time. Once we are in a position to close, which means that we have everything on the seller's side, so we have all the payoff demands, the seller has signed off on their deed, the buyer signed their loan documents, the lender has funded, then we can go ahead, long as we've all funded. So it's a process. Escrow is really a process. There are a lot of things that happen in an escrow transaction. And every once in a while, we have what we call an easy close, but not very much anymore because there's so many things that can come into an escrow transaction. So the idea of being in escrow is when there's a contract. So, but there's also an escrow, which is the transaction that we're working on. So escrow, actually, I think we're going to get to a slide where it talks about it. The actual word escrow comes from the French word scroll, which means that the scroll, the grant deed, is handed to the buyer, and the buyer in turn gives the seller money. So that's how they used to do it. They used to sit at a table. Here you can have these 5 whatever, and in exchange I'll take your little cobblestone house. So why is there an escrow timeline? So you have, when you've opened the escrow, you're going to put on your contract when escrow is going to close. So that's really important because if the transaction involves a loan, it might take longer for that loan to be processed. If it's a cash transaction, generally those can close faster because there's no loan process. There's no appraisal that needs to be done. Credit doesn't need to be run. But if there's a loan, it may take additional time for the lender to fund. There might be certain conditions that the buyer has to close the transaction. If it's a government loan, the seller might have to prepare something. So that's why there's an escrow timeline so that everyone can meet their particular requirements in a timely fashion. And that way we know what the time is.
What are the main things that need to happen for escrow?
What needs to happen? Okay. We need to have all payoff demands in for the seller. We need to have the seller sign all their documents in front of a notary. Buyer would need to sign their loan documents, get insurance, provide their funds to close. And then once we have all that, say the lender has funded, then we can go ahead and close. So there are a lot of things that can happen and every escrow is different. So when you get involved in multiple escrows, you'll see that, you know, some requirements on some escrows are not required on others. So you have a land purchase, you don't necessarily need to have insurance. There's no loan documents, we just need to make sure we have good funds from the buyer to close. So every transaction is different.
Yes, that's it.
So there's an escrow timeline also because what title does is we provide a preliminary title report. A preliminary title report is, it pulls all reported information on that particular property. So it'll show us any liens or judgments that we need to get payoffs on, pay off mortgages. We have all that information so we know how we can issue clear title for the buyer. So that might take a little bit of additional time. Sometimes there's contracts between the buyer and the seller, like there's rent, something like that. It just depends on the lender if they're gonna allow that to go through an escrow transaction. So, and then it talks about people who have payoff loans. So sometimes getting a payoff loan or payoff on a loan is harder than others. So Wells Fargo is super easy to get a payoff on, but there's some little lenders that take, you know, maybe 7 days. So it just depends. That's why we have an escrow timeline to know how much time we have to get everything in our transaction. So other things are lenders. So if you have a lender, say on your contract, you have your buyer's getting a first, second, third, which sometimes happens with some of those down payment assistance loans. So sometimes those loans take longer to prepare. And so you would have talked to the buyer's lender so you would know what the time frame was, you know, the 45 days to close. So that way you would know what those parameters were. Some buyers, if you had a property that was, say, a ranch or maybe even commercial, they might have additional inspections that need to be done that the buyer wants to have done and see, review in time before they close the transaction. So again, every escrow is different. Some escrows seriously can close in 5 days. Others take 90. It just
So it's like 5 to 90 days.
pretty much. It just depends. So if you have a cash transaction, you say that the escrow is pre-opened with your escrow officers. So they have the prelim, they have all the payoffs in. You get a cash buyer, they're ready to go. We could close. So this is life of an escrow. So I'm going to go ahead and move a little bit over here so you can see the both sides. So we have buyer side and the seller side. So as you go down.
I also have this like in a PDF if you guys want me to email it to you too, if it helps.
So this will show you really clearly and concisely what happens in a transaction. So buyer selects you guys as a realtor. The seller has selected a realtor. Say you're the listing agent, you're the buyer's agent. It's happening with your sellers and buyers. So the buyer hopefully gets pre-approval before he goes out looking at houses. The seller, the buyer is going to view a home with one of you, wants to buy the house. So they select a house and they write a contract. So the seller already has their house listed. They get the contract that you have written with your buyer. Sellers agreed, buyers agreed to the terms of the contract. Those are escrow instructions. Escrow is open. So generally what happens is escrow is open, we get a contract. There are some properties that you might want to pre-open if there's something like you need to have a color code map done for the easements. You think there might be an issue with title, you'd open those in advance.
You said escrow is open when the contract, when you receive a contract?
That's when escrow is generally open, but you can sometimes pre-open an escrow transaction if you needed to have a prelim in advance.
Yeah.
So if you're concerned about a property, weren't sure who the owner was or what mortgages were on it, we can open a pre-sale for you so you can get that information up front.
Or if you knew that you were dealing with someone that maybe there's like a child support lien or some sort of a lien on it, you know, we can go ahead and get, that way we can get those ordered up front. Because sometimes certain things take a little bit longer.
Yeah, your seller tells you, I think I might have an IRS lien. Those payoff demands take about 20 days to get. So that would be an instance where we'd want to start working on it before you had.
Yeah, and if you have a question, anytime you take a listing, feel free to reach out to myself, and I can help kind of guide you with that too. If you're like, hey, my seller told me this, whatever, call me and we'll get it going for you. Okay.
for sure. So then escrow is open, and if there was a prelim not ordered prior, we would order that preliminary title report. That's that report that shows any liens, mortgages, judgments on property, shows the owner's information. So then the seller has some items that they need to complete so that we know whether or not we need to withhold taxes at closing. They give us their payoff information so we can start working on ordering their mortgage payoffs. Various inspections are ordered, so that means the seller, if it's required, would have ordered whatever, maybe a roof report to see how the roof is good for. So that is going on simultaneously while everything else, while the prelim is being worked on, et cetera. And so then inspection reports need to be approved. So the buyer might need to approve the prelim and the roof report that was done. Prelim gets sent to the buyer. You probably have already seen it, sent it to the buyer, and then we send it to the buyer, make sure that it's good. Appraisal is probably ordered up front now because it takes longer because of COVID, it was still a little bit backed up. Buyer would now let their lender know who the insurance company is. We don't order the insurance. The lender has to have that before. And then we go ahead and we start working on our closing documents. So we're going to start drawing the seller's documents. We don't necessarily need the buyer's loan docs in order to do that. And so then loan documents come to us. We get them ready and your buyer signs. Then the buyer, we go ahead and sign off on their documents. Seller would sign off on their documents. We would know how much money we needed from the buyer to send for their final funds. So they get their funds to us. Lender would review the package that we send. And then once they fund, go ahead and send a request to have all the documents reported. So once that happens, we'll let you know that we're on record. Buyer gets the keys, seller gets her proceeds. Cool, yeah? And that's when we tell you those magic words that we're on record. So when I talked about funds having to be good funds in order to close a transaction, I mean, for the most part, we think that funds are really not ever bad, but for an escrow transaction, good funds are defined by a code that we have to apply by. So good funds for us to close today would mean that we can get funds and report a transaction. So we cannot have funds that are not considered to be good funds and report a transaction because our files get audited. If they found out that we reported on funds that weren't good, we've got serious issues. So that's why we comply with the good funds law. So good funds. If I get a wire transfer today on a transaction by reporting cutoff, so in Sacramento, it's about 2:45. If I get a wire in, by then I can report a transaction. So a wire today is considered to be good funds. A cashier's check today means I can't close until tomorrow. Those funds have to actually be banked in our account overnight. That's just what they have determined that is the funds. So if your buyer brought us good funds yesterday, they brought the cashier's check yesterday, I get their lender's wire today, I can report. What are not good funds is a personal check. So we take personal checks a lot of times for the earnest money deposit. If it's like a cash transaction, it's going to close in 5 days, we wouldn't take a personal check. If it says official check on it, it kind of looks like a cashier's check, but it's not good funds. We can't take money from your client's account. So those automatic withdrawal that they can set up with a gym or insurance or mortgage companies, we can't take any funds from someone's account. So when you have a transaction in your buyer or you have questions about what's good funds as far as closing the transaction, just ask. We're happy to tell you. We want to make sure everything closes timely. So we don't want your buyer to be confused what is good funds and what isn't.
So you said they have to have good funds in order to close escrow.
To record a transaction, exactly. Yeah.
And a wire transfer is good.
Today, we could report today.
And the other one that wasn't good was?
A cashier's check we can report the next day. We can't record on a personal check. We'd have to have that in our bank and have time to close to have it clear before we close.
Oh, that's good.
Good funds, yeah. So complying in an escrow, we have to prorate the California taxes. So If you have any escrow transaction, you will see taxes being prorated unless we're closing at the last day of the tax period. So in California, the calendar year, actually everybody's calendar year starts in January. In California, the fiscal tax year starts on July 1st. So the fiscal tax year for this county and every county in California starts July 1st any year, and it ends the next year, June 30th. So right now we are in the 2021-2022 fiscal tax year. And that fiscal tax year started July 1st of 2021 and it'll end June 30th of 2022. So if we closed an escrow transaction today, we'd have to make sure that the first installment, which covered July 1st to December 31st, was paid. And the second installment that covers January 1st to June 30th, we pay it prorated. So one party would pay it and then the other party would prorate the difference. So if we close today, they say the seller paid it, the buyer would prorate in escrow the funds to cover the closing from today to the end of the tax period. So that way they don't have to reconcile anything after escrow closes. We take care of it through transaction. So you guys all understand what prorations are. We're making sure that whatever party should be charged for whatever time frame close. Say we close today, we have to prorate to the end of the tax year. So seller paid it, buyer would prorate the difference to the seller. That makes sense? Kind of, sort of. So this is what would happen. So we pay the second installment. So say the second installment is $1,500. Seller would pay the second installment through the escrow transaction. So we would put it on their closing statement. So that second installment covers January 1st to June 30th.
You're saying that the seller has to pay the taxes for the,
Either they have to pay them or they have to prorate to the buyer. So it just depends on if the lender wants us to pay it, if they're setting an impound account and they're planning on paying it. Regardless, we'll prorate through the escrow. So say the seller is paying it through the transaction. So we pay $1,500 on the seller side closing. But because we're closing today, the buyer would give the difference. So that they would give the difference from close of escrow. So today is the 25th. Sorry, 25th.
Yep.
So we would, on our closing statement, we would have the amount that covers January 25th to June 30th, whatever that amount is. So maybe $1,300. The buyer would actually credit back to the seller. So the seller would only pay for the 25 days of this tax period through the transaction. And then the buyer would be responsible for the difference. So through the escrow, we would make sure that seller only paid 25 days and the buyer paid the other part of the tax year. And yeah.
so there has to be an agreement on who's gonna pay the taxes.
No. So the seller is responsible for taxes.
So-
It is their house, so they're responsible till the close of escrow.
For the close of escrow.
So if we're closing today, the seller is responsible until January 25th.
Oh.
So we would, in effect, they would pay January 1st to the 25th. And the buyer would pay the 25th, the 25th to June 30th,
Seller pays up till,
up till close.
Up top.
And we take care of that at our escrow table. So we have that figured into our escrow statement. So we would make sure that the seller only pays for what they're responsible for. And the buyer pays whatever they're responsible for. So if it's a homeowners association, and say it's a monthly homeowners association, the seller paid the January dues, but the buyer's closing on January 25th. So they're responsible for 6 days of homeowners association dues. So at closing, we're gonna have the buyer credit 6 days to the seller, that prorated amount. Does that make sense? If it's a 31-day month?
so the seller is paying the homeowner, association fees up till close too?
Yes.
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 So I'm giving you a couple of examples of what we prorate and how. So the seller's
We take care of that.
Yeah,
We take care of the
it for
probation. You don't have
escrow.
to worry about it. Yeah.
But I'm just talking about taxes, so I wanted to explain prorations a little bit better, so you might get it. Yeah? I can tell you still the question.
I'm not all the way with you, I'm sorry, but.
It's okay.
I'm trying.
So
It'll take a little bit. Don't
It
worry.
is confusing. So we handle anything that is something that gets paid over and over again, like a recurring bill, taxes, homeowners association dues. We make sure that at closing, The seller only pays up until the day of close, and then the buyer starts paying from then on. So if it's something that we could prorate through the escrow, like taxes or homeowners association dues, we will. If it's a water bill and it's quarterly, we'll prorate that through the escrow. So prorate means that we're dividing
You
it.
guys are making sure all the utilities are paid.
We do that at closing too.
You do that, all the utilities,
Yes.
gas, water,
No,
sewage,
no, not gas.
no.
No,
Just the
gas,
county.
yeah, anything that is reported. So if they would report a lien, and PG&E or SMUD does not do that,
Oh, so if there was a lien, then that has to be paid.
we'd have to pay that, but anything that
if
is
they
a
were
lien,
back, there could be back money owed. And-
yes,
and
so we pay that too, but
You would pay that too.
from the seller side.
Okay.
So anything that's lienable, we want to make sure is current. And if it's something that can be prorated, some water districts do want us to prorate, others just close it out when they close the transaction and start the new bill for fire. Depends on every particular water. So back to the taxes. So the tax year starts on July 1st, but our calendar year starts January 1st. So April 15th is the last day for your buyer if they're moving into the property or to file either a veterans or homeowners exemption. You actually get a reduction in your annual taxes if you're a veteran or if you're going to live in the property. So that's the last day to file your exemption. The buyer gets a document after escrow closes and ask them some questions. If they send that in prior to April 15th, they'll get that reduction. First installment is due February 1st. The second installment is due November 1st. So it shows the tax dates. And then if someone doesn't pay the tax by June 30th, the taxes become defaulted. That would show on a preliminary title report. We would pay it from the seller side. Y'all tracking? Okay, so how property taxes are determined. So we don't determine how the tax amount, and we actually will never give your buyer what the new tax amount will be because we never know what it's going to.
It's gonna change when they purchase it for a different price.
Exactly. So it's based on the sales price, and each particular county or area has basically a calculation that you can apply it to have a good estimate. So the value will change, and if there's Mello-Roos taxes on the property, those get added in general tax bill. So Mello-Roos taxes are taxes that the subdivision builder, they agreed with the tax collector that they would have in the new buyer's payments so that the new subdivision could have schools and lighting and street lights and sidewalks. So that gets paid with the taxes.
If I bought a home for a certain price, how likely, and the price, the value went up a lot, how likely is my taxes gonna change, like to higher? Is that,
Yeah, pretty likely.
Yes.
it is?
Pretty likely.
Yes.
Yeah. So they reassess you based on the sales price. So once you buy a new piece of property, say for $800,000, they're gonna assess you at $800,000. And then they're gonna start changing it every year after that.
Well, they'll change it according to the value.
If
Yes.
values go up or values go down.
But only when it gets reappraised.
No, no. The tax collector can change your taxes every single year, but they can only do it in small increments.
Yes.
And if you live in the property, it's a very small increment. I think it's, I'm not sure exactly what they reassess you.
It's small.
Yeah.
It's like for instance, we put a pool in our house and you have to fill out
Yeah.
like a thing
Yeah,
on
you
how
do
much
too,
you
yeah.
have to, how much your pool costs. And so they will reassess your value of your home because you've added value now to your home. It's a very small increment, but they will. And like Liz said, but then if values drop,
Oh, yes.
your taxes will also drop too.
So taxes are less if you live on the property than if you're renting. the
So you
property.
get a $7,000 reduction in, say, the sales price. So if you live there, you bought the house for $800,000, they'll reassess you at $783,000. So you get a small break for that.
For living there.
Yes.
Veterans
versus-
get different sorts of exemptions depending on how disabled they are. That's a case by case. So questions about taxes would have to go to the auditor or the tax person. We can help you as much as we can help you. If you have a question, your buyer has a question about their tax bill, get it. But for the most part, we refer them for reassessment questions back to the assessor. So we talked about when taxes are due. So the tax year is not January 1st to, sorry. So I'm actually gonna just skip by that because we talked about
Yeah.
that. And it's wrong, I'm so sorry. So I mentioned that I would talk about some things that have this in your transaction, that it's something that you definitely need to let your escrow officer know. It could hold up the transaction if we're not aware of it. Okay. So if your buyer or your seller is using a power of attorney, you need to see a copy of it and have it by our title department. So some powers of attorney don't have the specific verbiage that we need to be able to insure them. So we want to see it to make sure that it's insurable and that we can use it for the transaction. If you have a buyer who's getting a loan and they're using a power of attorney, the lender needs to approve it as well. So probably the best case scenario with the power of attorney would be that you would ask us to prepare it. We can send someone out and have it signed and get it notarized. So if your buyer is going overseas or being deployed, we can do that and make sure it's a fidelity approved notary, the document is approved. That's probably the best case. Questions? Do you guys know what a 1031 tax deferred exchange is? No? So it's a very, very cool thing that the government decided years ago. We passed it into law. They decided that if you say your seller is going to exchange a piece of property, they don't live in the property, they're going to buy something else. So they can buy something at a higher amount, basically roll those tax ramifications into their new purchase. So they don't have to pay taxes at closing. We don't have to collect money to give to the franchise tax board at closing. They can actually just roll it over and then they deal with taxes when they finally sell that last piece of property. So if they're doing a 1031 tax deferred exchange, there's some documents that both buyer and seller need to sign out of the exchange documents. So just let us know who the exchange company is. It should be written in the contract, but every once in a while, the seller or buyer decides after they sign the contract, oh, hey, I want to do 1031 tax deferred exchange. So it's a great product. You can roll your taxes in, keep rolling it over, buying bigger and bigger. So I guess you have to, yeah, but anyways. So if they have questions about it, it's probably best to refer them to a tax person before they decide. Vesting issues. So if you get a preliminary title report and you look at the first page of the prelim where it shows who the owner is, if that owner doesn't match who you think is the owner is, really need to turn around and talk to your escrow officer about it to make sure why they're not vested, if there was an issue with the previous deed. Sometimes we have issues in the spouse signing your spousal deed. We need to take care of that. So if whoever signed your contract is not the actual same people that are on title, we want to talk about that. Does that make sense? So say my mother is selling her piece of property and she didn't have her spouse, she's not married, but say she didn't have her spouse sign off and she holds title as just a married woman, we have to have the spouse sign off so that everything is vested correctly and that any spousal interest is signed off. If you have someone who's in a trust, we're going to have prepare a trust document. So we just want to make sure that everything is that your seller, whoever your seller is actually whoever is on title. So we can, at some point in time, you might want to have a prelim class just so you know what's on the prelim.
In what situation would a person not be on it, him trying to sell a house? I don't get that.
So say you're working with an investor and whoever owned the property deeded it to the investor and only took some money, walked away. Unless that document was prepared, recorded by a title company, we're going to vest it in the old owner's name and have some notes next to it to make sure that we get something signed by that old owner to make sure that they didn't sign under duress. Since we're issuing title insurance at the end of the day, we actually have to sometimes go back and redot our I's and cross our T's just to make sure everything's insurable and that, say, 100 years from now, there won't be an issue that we didn't take care of. And then every once in a while, a title company might make a mistake. So that would be another reason. So that pretty much everything we can take care of, but it might just take us a little longer. Legal description issues. So there would be a note on your preliminary title report about that. For the most part, those are issues that our title officer would be talking to you about. If you ever see anything like that on there, we would start working on it right away. For the most part, that's because something didn't get recorded. So, and that we can go back to the old title company and fix that. So I talked about mortgages. How's it going? Good. So I talked about mortgages. So when you get your preliminary title report, say for your seller, you're going to want to make sure that you look on that prelim to see what mortgages there are and make sure that we're going to do an estimate to make sure there's enough funds to pay all of them. But if you see a statement of information, I don't know if you've heard of what statement of information is before. It's asking for additional information on either the seller or the buyer. For the most part, we ask that because your seller or buyer has a common name.
Yeah.
So say your seller or buyer is John Smith, we're going to ask for a statement of information to clear all the other John Smiths from your party. Say if your seller is John Jacob Jigelheimer Schmidt, and we need a statement of information because it's not a common name, that probably found liens against him. So we ask for statements of information so we clear title against that party. That's for the most part. And then every once in a while, it's because we found a lien under that particular party. We need to work on getting it cleared and getting an amount to pay. So if you get your preliminary, yes,
So a lien against the person selling the house.
yes, or if it's an IRS tax lien, you have to pay that to the buyer.
So he needs to have his liens cleared that are connecting him towards the house.
Yeah, and we actually, escrow takes care of ordering all that information and paying it from the seller's side. So the seller doesn't have to go out and pay these particular liens before we close. We make sure that everything gets paid when we're paying everything off through the escrow. So we basically take all the funds that the buyer has given us and the lender has given us, their lender, and make sure that the mortgage gets paid off and any utility liens or judgments gets paid if there's defaulted taxes. And then after all those things are paid, we get the seller the rest of it. Well, of course, we pay you too. So when you get a preliminary title report, and you see that one of your parties is deceased, so you only had, say, Mrs. sign off on all your documents because she said her husband is deceased. So if your seller is, one of them is deceased and they're in a trust, they're doing tenants, community properties, without survivorship, at closing of the escrow, we can go ahead and take care of preparing those documents. Your seller just needs to give us a certified death certificate. Go ahead and prepare all the documents so it doesn't go to probate. However, if your seller, say, is John Smith, he held title as a single man and passed away, there's no one else on title, then that property would need to go to probate. So in the event that that is the case, you just want to let us know, let your escrow officer know, so that we can contact the probate attorney and get all the required documents. Ready to put you back to sleep.
I'm trying.
It's a lot of information.
lot.
Just know that we are here to answer your guys' questions anytime, because it's a lot of information until you get into an escrow with a buyer or a seller. That's really when you're going to get the feel of it. This is just to prepare you a little bit for it.
Where's
So,
your guys' office?
right here on Truxell and Arena.
Oh, it's right close to here.
Yeah, right, like
You guys both work together?
2 minutes. She does all of our trainings, but I work there with, I have 2 escrow officers out of that office there. Me. So, yeah, and I'll connect you with them.
We can actually send you
This
copies of
office
this.
was always
if you have
connected to
questions.
agents. You guys?
I do a lot of business with a lot of agencies. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I'm gonna leave you my card, so
Okay.
you can call me or email me and I will connect you with someone if you have any questions too. So,
Because in like 2 minutes, you're gonna be like, I'm done.
yeah, you're gonna be like
Done?
information
I don't know what
overload.
she said.
It's hard. It's a hard top. I mean, you guys are learning so much just alone in the real estate side with the contracts and all of that and how to properly write the contracts. And then you throw escrow into the mix and it's like, just know that really our job is to take your hand and to hold your hand through that transaction and to be there for you and to answer those questions, and we'll walk you through each step of it. So, yeah, don't think that we're just going to tell you this and then throw you out to the wolves. Okay.
Pretty much, if you have something like this on a transaction, you're going to partner with your escrow officer to figure out.
Yes.
That's what happens. We to end up being detectives and therapists and all kinds of other things in our role. But for the most part, we just want you to know these things might be an issue. So if they pop up, we would be talking about it. So if there's a change in marital status, say your seller bought the piece of property by himself and he got married, we don't need to have the wife sign off on this. But say you have a buyer who is separated or they're getting divorced. When we hear that someone is separated or getting divorced, we consider that they're still married. So if you have a buyer who's getting a loan, we're going to need to have that spouse sign an interspousal. So if you know that, it's best to prepare your escrow officer. If say that buyer's divorcing husband, separated husband is out of the country, maybe in jail. I just say that because that's happening. Just let us know. If you have a transaction where you have an entity that's going to be the owner, say a corporation, limited liability company, we're going to just want to see the documents they filed with the Secretary of State. So if you end up working with one of those, just know that they're used to being asked for them. So we'll ask them and they'll send it, but know that we're going to ask them. We would just want to make sure that whoever's signing on behalf of that entity is the one who's going to sign. If you have a seller who didn't live at the property as their primary residence, there's a withholding requirement that might apply. So if it's a primary residence and they live at the house, this is not anything to do with them. But if it was an investment property and they're not doing that tax deferred exchange, then they might be required to have us, Fidelity, collect 3 1/3% to withhold franchise tax. So just know it only applies if they didn't live at the house. And once we know that, we can get them the documents so they can talk to their tax advisor about it. And then this might be the very last slide.
And then we just touch on wires after this last slide. On wires.
Yeah.
The safety of it.
So when you have a buyer or a seller and they are having their documents signed, they're going to need to be notarized. So when you're being notarized, you have to have specific documents that's considered to be good ID. So California driver's license, California real ID, passport, military ID, those are considered to be good documents that notarize your party with. Costco card, insurance card, those don't work. So say your seller you don't think your seller's left the house for the last 20 years, you might want to ask them if they have a real ID, just so that we can get them notarized when we close. And
I had someone else say that yesterday about that.
So they have to have a real ID to get things notarized?
No, you have to have a
No.
California driver's license,
You have to have one of the,
Passport.
yeah, just one of them.
one of them, just
Yes,
one.
one of them.
What was the thing with real?
With the
Well,
California.
real ID, most people that are getting like driver's license
Yeah.
now are getting that real ID driver's license. That's for traveling. So, yeah, so
A
California.
regular driver's license, you can be notarized with. Yep. Yeah. Or
Or a
passport.
California identification.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be real.
No.
Yeah,
I
like
have a real ID and I can be notarized, so, yeah.
Yeah, I had someone yesterday, she's a senior citizen, a
Mhm.
client of mine, and she doesn't drive anymore, but she has a California identification card. So it's,
That's perfect.
and I said, that's perfect, that's all she needs. So, and then I'm gonna have Liz touch on wires because that's a really big issue right now with fraud. And how we go about it to really protect your buyers and your sellers.
So we will never, ever send you wire instructions. If you ask us to send you wire instructions, we'll tell you we can't. We can only send them to your buyer. We will send them secure. They will be multi-factor authenticated, so they'll have to get a code on their phone to use them. It's best that they call us and confirm that they got them and they're the right ones. Our wire instructions will never change during a transaction. So people have devised all kinds of crazy ways to get at buyers or even sellers. So it's just best that you let your buyers know, verify wire instructions, call before you wire, make sure that the wire instructions are correct. What the best thing to do is make sure you get the phone numbers of who your escrow officer is going to be to your buyer, so they know to contact, use that phone number that you gave to them, and that way they can call and confirm.
Yes. And we do the same when we wire out a seller's proceeds. We will, we again get that information through a secure portal or secure email from your sellers. But before we wire, out their proceeds, we pick up the phone and we call them to your seller directly to confirm their account information, things like that. We always double check. So it's like kind of a slogan that says inquire before you wire. Make sure they do, make sure they are in contact with us for
And let us know
anything.
that they wired so we can watch out for the money.
Yes.
So it's just, we're kind of freaked out by wires because we don't want your buyer's money to disappear somewhere. So if they want to get a cashier's check instead of a wire, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know,
And sometimes people do.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are, elderly people are nervous about that or, going into a bank and wiring. So they will want to bring us a cashier's check. So
Questions about that, or are you already like full? Your eyes are closed.
information overload. I told them, don't worry. We're here to hold their hand and walk them through the process. It's a lot of information. They're learning so much on the contract side, how to properly write a contract and how to do this and how to do that. So that we're here. And that's what a key escrow officer really does do for you, is hold your hand. And our job is to really make you guys shine in front of your clients. Like that is what our job is. If we succeed when you succeed. That's our job, is to literally go hand in hand with you and walk you through each step.
And there's no dumb question. Seriously, there's no dumb question you can ask us. We'd rather have you ask and not have there be an issue. So always ask.
Yes.
And as I said, every transaction is different. So what this easy transaction looked like yesterday, you have a new one that's, a mess. Just ask. Seriously, we're happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And these classes are not for you to memorize
No.
every single thing that they talk
No,
about.
because that's
The class is for you to hear and to have an understanding, so that way when you go to your clients, you have a little bit of an understanding.
Yeah.
But honestly, I am not an escrow expert. I
no.
will never pretend to be one to my clients. So when I have clients call me all the time and they say, oh, what's this? And I say, you know what? That's not my realm. That's not my realm. So be okay with not having the answers. It's actually a wonderful thing. I push off questions to lenders. I push off questions to escrow officers, because that's not my job.
And we have
And honest-
questions to title sometimes. Might have our title officer talk directly to your buyer if they have a question.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been doing it for 7 years, and in the beginning, I wanted to know everything and I wanted to have all the answers. And then I quickly realized that that's the wrong way to be, because it puts more pressure on me, but also what about a follow-up question? Like, what if they have follow-up questions? So again, partner with an escrow officer who's willing to, like she said, walk you through it, answer your questions. Maybe you haven't given them business yet, but you have questions, you need some help. It's always important to partner with you. I really appreciate you guys coming
Yeah.
in.
Yes, and I, if you would like, I'm happy to, I don't know if you want to connect me with their emails. I'm happy to email them
Absolutely.
my contact information too, the ones that are at home.
Yes, so what we'll do is we will send out the recording from today's class.
Okay.
With the presentation along with your contact
Okay,
information.
great.
So that way, if anybody wants to reach out
Sure.
to you, they can.
Yeah.
And then
If they
they
have
can
any
follow
questions.
along the class again if they want to watch it over and over, and they'll have the presentation and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. It's a lot, and that's what I was telling, well, everybody that, don't, like exactly what you said, don't feel like you have to memorize this, and every transaction is different, and some will have some similarities, because obviously that's what we do as an title and escrow company. Our job is to clear everything up and clear title up and close it. But everything is every deal is a little bit different, but really once you get into contract and you get in there, you'll see that we'll hold your hand and we'll kind of guide you through the steps of what needs to happen.
And you'll remember some of those keywords and things I told you would be an issue. We have, she's a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're so welcome. It was so nice to meet you guys. And
Honestly,
honestly,
great questions.
yeah, yes, thank you for the questions, because it really helps us.
All right, so tomorrow we've got Vince coming in here and he's, camera on. Crap, look, now the camera won't leave you alone.
That's fine with you.
No.
Maybe it's not.
There it is. I see you on there.
Oh, I know I'm on there, but hey, stop moving. I don't know why it won't do it. Oh, well, whatever.
It's on
Anyways, tomorrow we have class. Vince is gonna be here teaching tomorrow and Thursday.
There.
I will be-
I got it to move.
Hold on 1 second. All right, tomorrow Vince is gonna be talking about a day in the life of an agent. So what are you actually going to do with your time every day? What does that look like? And then on Thursday, we're going to have prospecting. Vince is gonna teach it again here at the Sacramento office. And then on Friday, we've got disclosures, prelims, HOAs, Mellorews for contrast class. So I will see you guys on Friday, but be here for business classes tomorrow and Thursday.
I hope you have a good day. Bye.
Bye, guys.